Nobody talks about the cold that morning. They talk about what she did. Plus, they talk about the photographs, the reaction, the headlines that came after. But nobody ever starts with the cold. And the cold is where it all began. It was the kind of February morning that London does better than anywhere else in the world. Not the romantic kind of cold. The other kind. The kind that gets into your coat before you've even left the tube. The kind that makes the air taste like iron and stone. The sky was the color of old dishwater, flat and heavy. And the tourists gathered outside the gates of Buckingham Palace had their shoulders pulled up to their ears, hands shoved deep, breath coming out in little white ghosts. I was standing maybe 30 meters back from the south gate, not because I was waiting for anything in particular. I work nearby. Press credentials, freelance, the kind of work where you show up somewhere slightly important every morning and hope something slightly interesting happens. Most mornings, nothing does. That morning was supposed to be the same. The changing, pretty much, of the guard was still an hour away. The crowd was thin, maybe 60, 70 people, the diehards and the jet-lagged clutching coffees and phone screens. The way tourists always do when they're somewhere that's supposed to mean something and they're not entirely sure what they're feeling yet. A school group from what sounded like Germany. Kids in matching yellow jackets, already loud and restless, their teacher making the face teachers make everywhere in the world, that flat, patient, a privately desperate expression that says I chose this profession in a different lifetime. A pair of Japanese tourists in matching white puffer coats stood at the railing, so still, so symmetrical they looked like they'd been placed there by a curator. Pigeons. There are always pigeons. And then, from the corner of the gate, a ripple. Not dramatic. Plus, not a sound or a shout. Just a shift in the air, the way a crowd moves when something changes that nobody has officially announced yet. A few heads turned, which then a few more. The German school kids stopped being loud, which, if you've ever witnessed it, is more alarming than the noise itself. I raised my camera without thinking. Old instinct. What I saw through the lens stopped me cold. A black car. Not the usual procession, not the flag and fanfare kind, had come quietly through the east entrance. You know, no outriders, no formation. The kind of entrance designed to go unnoticed, and for about 40 seconds, it almost did. Well, but she stepped out. And the thing about Princess Catherine, the thing that photographs never quite catch, is that she doesn't enter a space the way you expect royalty to enter a space. There's no sweep, no performance of arrival. She stepped out of that car the way someone steps out of a car when they're already thinking about what comes next, already somewhere slightly ahead of where her body is. She was in a coat the color of midnight, deep navy, fitted, nothing flashy. Hair down, which in itself was unusual for an official appearance. She wasn't supposed to be there, that was the thing, which there was no itinerary. No announcement. The palace press office had scheduled a different engagement entirely for that morning, and the half-dozen journalists with actual press credentials were across the city at a hospital ribbon-cutting, waiting. I was here by accident. Plus, she was here. And I'd not understand why for another 14 minutes. The equerry at her side, a young man with the posture of someone who has spent years learning how to be invisible while standing 6 inches from power, leaned in and said something. You know, she shook her head. Plus, short, decisive, the shake of, well, someone who has already had the argument and won it. She started walking, not toward the official entrance, not toward the ceremonial doors or the pathway that protocol carves out for people of her position. She walked toward the public gate, and which toward the tourists. The German school-like group went absolutely silent, which the kind of silence that descends on children when they suddenly understand they're inside a real moment. The teacher's face changed. The privately desperate expression dissolved into something unguarded, something I don't have a proper word for except present. Kind of, fully, entirely present. Plus, the pair sort of, in white puffer coats, gripped each other's arms. The equerry, to his very considerable credit, adjusted course without breaking stride and followed her. His expression was the controlled blank of a man mentally rewriting an entire morning's logistics in real time. She stopped, in my opinion, at the gate. She did not wave from a distance. She did not do the royal hand raise, that small and practiced gesture that means I see you from 15 feet away. She put both her hands around the iron railing. Bare hands, no gloves, and the morning was cold. And she leaned in, and she started talking. Not to the crowd, to one person, which I swung my lens to find who. There was a girl at the front of the crowd. You know, maybe 10, maybe 11. Small for her age, the kind of small that makes adults unconsciously step around you like your furniture, because you don't register as someone with weight or presence. She was in the yellow jacket of the school group, but she drifted slightly apart from it, the way certain children do. Not lost, just operating on a slightly different frequency from everyone else. She had a notebook, not a phone, plus a notebook, the small kind, spiral-bound, with a pen tucked into the coil. And she'd been writing in it when the shift in the crowd happened. She looked up, and she found herself 2 feet from Princess Catherine's face. The girl did not scream, did not grab for a phone, did not do any of the things most adults would have done. She stared, and Catherine, in my opinion, Princess Catherine, future Queen of England, woman whose face is on commemorative mugs in gift shops from here to Auckland, smiled. Not the formal smile. Not the one that reads the same distance away as it does up close. The other one, the smaller one, the one that I think crinkles slightly at the corners and looks like it wasn't planned. She pointed at the notebook. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could read it. Lip reading, after enough years of this job, becomes second nature in crowds where you can't get close enough for audio. She said, "What are you writing?" The girl looked down at the notebook like she'd forgotten she was holding it. Then she pretty much looked up, which then she said something back. Catherine's head, in my opinion, tilted, which she said something else, shorter, and almost a question. The girl you know opened the notebook. Plus, she showed her. Catherine read it. Whatever it was, she actually read it, eyes moving across the page. Not the performance of reading, but actual reading. And her face did something. I got the shot. I'll tell you exactly what I saw in that frame, because it's the image that ended up on the cover of 3 different magazines, that circulated around the world in 4 hours, that caused a palace spokesperson to release a statement by early afternoon simply confirming what everyone could already see. But her eyes were bright, not with happiness exactly, with something older than happiness, which something that looked like recognition, the specific expression of a person who has just encountered something that echoes something private and unspoken in themselves. She was holding the railing with both cold hands, and she was reading a child's notebook, and she looked, for 35 seconds, like she had forgotten entirely what she was. Like she was just a person reading something true. The equerry had stopped trying to recalibrate the logistics. He was watching too. The German teacher had both hands over her mouth. The children around her, 26 of them by my count, were watching with the total silence and the total attention that children bring to moments they can feel are important before they understand why. In my opinion, nobody took a video. Nobody shouted. 37 seconds of the rarest thing that happens in the proximity of any public figure. Stillness. Real stillness. Then Catherine straightened, handed the notebook back, said one more thing. The girl took the notebook back and held it against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something you've just been given a reason to keep. Catherine turned. Plus, and she looked straight into my lens, not startled, not annoyed. She held it for a beat, 1 full second, which is a long time, and her expression said nothing I can easily translate. Aware, composed, and something else beneath the composure that I'm still not sure I've the right to name. Then she walked back toward the car. The equerry fell in beside her. The crowd exhaled. Somewhere in the school group, a kid whispered something in German. Another kid shushed them. I lowered the camera. My hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. Not from the cold. I didn't file the photo immediately. That's not how I usually work. Usually I'm uploading before my coffee's gone cold, captions half-formed, chasing the window. But I stood there after the car disappeared and I didn't reach for my phone. I think, couldn't immediately explain why, except that it felt, this is going to sound strange, wrong to move fast. Like the moment was still breathing and running at it would startle it away. So I stood there with the crowd as it slowly remembered itself. The German school group came back online in stages. First one voice, then two, then the sound of 26 children rediscovering their volume levels. The teacher made, I guess, and her way through them to the girl in the yellow jacket, who was still standing slightly apart, still holding the notebook to her chest, and I watched the teacher reach her and put a hand on her shoulder and say something gentle. You know, the girl looked up. She nodded once. Then she tucked the notebook into her bag, carefully, the way you tuck in something that has become, in the last 4 minutes, a different object than it was before. I walked over. I know how that sounds. I know it was probably not my best professional moment. But something about the way she'd moved through the crowd, the way Catherine had moved toward her. Specifically, I mean the specific weight of what I'd just photographed. I needed to understand what I'd seen. I crouched down to eye level, which is something you learn to do if you want a child to talk to you like a person rather than a problem. That was quite a thing, I said. She looked at me with the evaluating calm that certain children have, the ones who've spent a lot of time around adults and have learned to take the measure of them before deciding how much to give. Did you see what she said to you? I asked. If you don't want to say, that's fine. A beat. Then, she asked what I was writing. And what were you writing? The girl looked down at her bag. Back up. A letter, she said, to my mum. I didn't say anything. The teacher nearby had gone very still. Plus, my mum's been in hospital, the girl said, in the particular tone of someone who has had to say this sentence many times and has learned to say it level because the other option is worse. So she really loves her. Princess Catherine. Has pictures and everything. So I was writing her a letter and telling her about being here. What it looks like. The guards and the building and everything. So she could see it. She paused. I was describing the gates, she said. Called my editor from a coffee shop 3 streets away. He picked, in my opinion, up on the second ring, which means he was already at his desk, which means it was one of those days. I could hear his coffee cup. I could, hear him waiting. I've got something, I said. A pause. Define something. The photograph or the story? Longer pause. You have look both? I looked down at the image on my camera screen. Catherine's, I guess, face at the railing. The bright, unguarded eyes. The notebook open between them. I've both, I said. What happened over the next 6 hours is the part that moved fast. The image, went to the desk at noon. By 1:30, it had cleared legal. By 2, it had been picked up by the wire, and by 2:15, there were 17 missed calls on my phone, which I mention only to explain why the rest of the afternoon is slightly blurred in my memory. The palace statement came at 3:47. I still have a screenshot of it, which it was 3 sentences, which by palace standards is practically a novel. Her Royal Highness made an unscheduled visit to the palace grounds this morning. The visit was, in my opinion, private in nature. Her Royal Highness would like to wish the family described in press reporting a full and speedy recovery. 3 sentences. The third one hit something in the chest like a closed fist. Because it meant she'd asked. Somewhere in those 14 minutes, or in the conversation I couldn't hear, she had learned enough about the girl and the mother and the letter to the woman in the hospital who had pictures on her wall. And she had asked. And pretty much someone had made a call, or a note had been passed, or something had moved through the quiet machinery. That actually surrounds royalty at all times. And by 3:47 the palace knew. And they'd chosen to say it publicly. Those 3 words: full and speedy recovery, not a formality, a specificity, and directed at one woman in one hospital bed who had sent her daughter to stand at the iron gate of a palace with a notebook and a pen to write down what the gates looked like so she could see. "Look," I called the teacher. She'd given, me her card at the gate. A small, reflexive gesture she'd made. While still in shock, the kind of thing people do in extraordinary moments when they're not sure what the protocol is. Her name was Mrs. Hartman. She answered in accented English, careful and measured, the way people speak in a second language when they want to be precise. "The girl," I said. "Is she all right?" A pause, which a breath. "She's," Mrs. Hartman said. "She was very quiet on the coach. I actually think she's still, how do you say, processing." "Did she say anything? On the ride back?" Another pause. "Kind of. Longer." "She said," Mrs. Hartman said slowly, "that she was going to finish the letter. That she had more to write now." I put my pen down. "And the photograph," Mrs. Hartman added. "She asked if there were photographs. I told her I believed so, yes. She said she would like to show her mother." I closed my notebook. Outside the coffee shop window, London was doing its afternoon thing. People moving, traffic, the low gray sky beginning to turn the specific shade of pewter it goes at 4 in winter. Ordinary, plus relentless, indifferent in the actually way cities are indifferent. And somewhere in it, a woman in a hospital bed was going to receive a letter about iron gates and gray sky, and a morning her daughter had stood in the cold with a notebook. And in the letter, alongside the description of the guards and the building and everything, there would be something new. There would be a moment at the railing. There would be a face that read the page and went bright. There would be, "I showed her, Mum." She actually read it, on which her eyes went all... I don't know what word the girl used for Catherine's expression, but I know what I saw. The calls kept coming. The image kept moving. Plus, by evening, the photograph had done the thing that only certain images do, the thing where it stops being a piece of news and becomes something else, something people sharen't to stay informed, but because looking at it does something in the chest region that they can't quite name and aren't trying to. One royal commentator on a television panel that evening called it a departure from form. Another said Catherine had shown an unusual degree of personal impulse. A third used the word unprecedented. They talked about protocol, about the guidelines around unscheduled public contact, but which about the question of what it signified for royal engagement going forward. They had graphics, they had context, they had panel discussion. None of them mentioned the cold. None of them mentioned the letter. None of them mentioned the specific and particular brightness of a person's eyes when they read something true. That's fine. That's not what they're for. I went home at 9. I made toast. I sat on the edge of my couch and I looked at the photograph again on my laptop, full screen this time, and I thought about the image in the way I rarely let myself think about the images I take, which is, what does this mean? Not what does it mean for the story, or the coverage, or the royal family's image, or the cultural moment. What does it mean that a woman with the whole weight of 1,000 years of protocol on her shoulders put her bare hands on a cold iron railing and leaned in and asked a small, quiet girl what she was writing, and then read it? And then something in her face cracked just slightly open. Honestly, not cracked badly, not painfully, which the way certain things crack open, the way mornings do, right at the edge. I basically ate my toast. which I thought about the girl's mother, her hospital room, whether it faced a window, whether the light came in. I thought about the letter, still unfinished, gaining new material. And I thought, and this is the part I haven't said to anyone, because it sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they're being precious about their own work. I thought, nobody planned this. Nobody planned the cold, or the school group, or the notebook, or the empty morning with no press and no itinerary and one journalist there by accident. Nobody choreographed the moment. Nobody briefed it on net or approved it or softened it for public consumption in advance. It just happened. The rarest thing, a real thing, in an unreal proximity with no performance buffer between it and the world. I finished my toast. To be fair, filed the caption. I went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about eyes going bright over a handwritten page and about what it must be like to have spent your entire adult life practicing the precise management of exactly how much of yourself the world gets to see. And then one gray February morning for 37 seconds to simply forget. 3 weeks later, I got a letter. Not an email. A letter, paper, handwritten, so postmarked from a town in Saxony I'd never heard of. The envelope had my name on it, care of the magazine, forwarded twice, which is why it took 3 weeks, the paper slightly soft from handling. Inside was a card. One of those plain white cards with a border, the kind sold in pharmacy gift sections in every country in the world. The handwriting was a child's, earnest, slightly large, still finding its proportions. It said, "Dear photographer, my name is Lena. You took the picture at the gate. My mum saw it. She cried, but the good kind. She's home now. She said, in my opinion, to say, thank you. The letter was very long in the end. Lena, I put the card on my desk. It's still there. I've taken photographs in courtrooms and conflict zones and hospital corridors. Burning buildings, and the aftermath of things I don't have words for that I use in polite conversation. I've a drawer full of press credentials from years and places. I've a shelf of work I'm proud of in the way that pride works when you've been doing something long enough, that you're not sure anymore where the craft ends and the person begins. The card isn't framed. It's just there, propped against the monitor, in a corner where my eye goes when I'm thinking. I want to tell you the thing I've been circling around since the morning it happened, because I've been asked to write this up properly. Not the wire caption, not the 2-sentence note that went with the photograph, but the actual account. And the actual account requires saying the thing I didn't say in any of the other versions. What I saw through that lens wasn't a royal moment. I've covered royal moments. I know their texture, and I know the way they're constructed, the careful warmth, the managed spontaneity, the public effect that's genuine enough to be affecting without being so genuine as to leave a person exposed. I'm not criticizing it, and it is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, and most people who do it with real skill and real care. What I saw that morning was different. What I saw was a person who had come somewhere unscheduled, without cameras or context, and who had looked at a child standing slightly apart from a crowd, had recognized something. Not a photo opportunity, not a symbolic moment, not the sort of encounter that gets written up in a palace newsletter. Something smaller and older than all of that. A child with a notebook. Writing toward someone who couldn't be there, and a woman who saw it and couldn't, for 37 seconds, maintain the very reasonable and very understandable distance that a lifetime of public life builds as a matter of simple survival. I've thought about that distance a lot, what it costs to build it, what it protects, what it occasionally, quietly, costs to lay it down, even briefly, even by accident, even at a cold February gate with no ceremony. No audience except 60 tourists and a German school group and one journalist who was there by accident. The palace commentators called it a departure from form. I think they were right about the word and wrong about the register. Because departure implies a thing that was planned, that was decided, that was a choice made at a clear fork in the road. What I saw didn't look like a choice. It looked like gravity, like when something pulls at the actual shape of you and you move toward it before the managing part of your mind catches up, and then the managing part catches up. You straighten, and you compose your face, and you find your equerry's eye, and you walk back to the car, and the morning resumes and the machinery moves forward. But to be honest, for those 37 seconds, gravity. The mother's name, I later learned, was Irina. I learned it through the teacher, through a chain of forwarded emails and one brief conversation that Mrs. Hartman was kind enough to pass along my contact for. I'm not going to reproduce the content of that conversation here because it belongs to a family in Saxony and not to a press account, but I'll say this. Irina had kept the photograph. I printed it. Not on phone paper, not a screenshot. Actually printed it, honestly, and framed it, and put it on the wall of her living room when she came home. Not the famous part of the photograph, not the angle that the magazines ran, not the one that ended up on the covers. She asked for a different one. I'd taken 3 frames in those. 37 seconds. The famous one, like the full face, the bright eyes, the open notebook, went everywhere. The second frame was slightly soft, a focus issue, not usable. The third was the one I nearly deleted. In the third frame, Catherine is straightening. Plus, she's already beginning to return to herself. The composure coming back, the distance reassembling. But she isn't quite finished. She's mid-movement, and her eyes are still down, still on the page. And then there's a half-second of transition visible on her face that's neither the brightness of before nor the composed neutrality of what comes after. It's the in-between, plus the seam. Irina wanted the third frame. I sent it without adding anything to the note. Some things don't basically need surrounding, which there is a version of this story that's about protocol. About, I guess, what it means that a member of the royal family made an unscheduled contact with a member of the public, about the departure from form, about what it signals for the institution going forward, about image management and soft power and the way the monarchy handles its own meaning in a contemporary era. I could write that version. It's not the one I'm writing. The one I'm writing is about a cold morning in February, about sort of the texture of a crowd before it knows it's witnessing something. About a girl, actually, who was writing a letter to her mother with a spiral-bound notebook and a pen tucked in the coil, who drifted slightly apart from her school group in the way certain children do, not lost, just operating on a different frequency. About TBH, 2 bare hands on cold iron. Plus, about basically eyes going bright over a handwritten page, about the specific quality of 37 seconds of real silence. Not polite silence, not managed silence, but the silence of 60 people who have all simultaneously understood they're inside something true. The last thing, which a month after the photograph ran, after the card came from Saxony, after the coverage had moved on the way coverage moves, I was walking past the palace on a different morning, a Tuesday. Our early, different weather, no crowd to speak of. I wasn't there for work. I was just walking. Plus, I stopped at the gate. Pretty much, I don't know why. Force of habit, maybe, which the way places where something real happened hold a very faint charge, a residue, almost nothing, barely perceptible. But there. I stood there for a minute, just a regular person, standing at a public gate in the cold. And I thought about the letter. Very long in the end. And I thought about a woman in a hospital room getting a piece of paper that said, "I'm here, Mum. Here's what the gates look like. Here's the cold. Here's the guards." And also something happened. Also someone stopped and read this. Also her eyes went, whatever word Lena had used. Whatever word a 10-year-old in a yellow jacket reaches for when she tries to describe the expression of a person's face in the 37-second interval between the life they normally carry and the life they actually have. when the distance drops for just a moment and the two are briefly, unmistakably the same. I don't know what words she used, and I know what I saw. And I know that the woman in Saxony framed the in-between frame, the seam, the half-second of transition, and put it on her wall when she came home. Not the brightness. Plus, the return. The moment of becoming composed again, which, if you think about it, if you sit with it long enough in a cold place with no particular agenda, is maybe its own kind of brave. The photograph was taken at approximately 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. The exposure was 1/400th of a second. The morning light, such as it was, came from the left. Everything else took considerably longer.